Following the Starfield Direct, we got an exclusive interview between Todd Howard and Ryan McCaffrey of IGN, and this was a really interesting one. Todd Howard here shares a ton of additional details on Starfield, some of the DLC plans for the game, the bugginess gets some commentary, but also some higher level things, like what's going on with Fallout 5 and why it's maybe not coming as soon as you thought, and even some high level talks of a potential Todd Howard retirement. But what made this interview so much better is Ryan McCaffrey actually has played about an hour of Starfield, so we actually get some really in-depth and good questions. Make sure you stick around with this one, as some of the interesting and deep stuff happens towards the end of the interview. Right off the bat, Todd Howard is asked about whether he feels the pressure from the community when it comes to Starfield.
We have put so much into this game, and it is, as you said, our first new IP in over 25 years. It's our first major release in about 8 years.
Yeah.
So for us, we have just put so much into it that we're just doing everything we can to make the best game that we can. Hope that everybody loves it, so.
A couple of things to highlight here. It seems like Bethesda are very internally motivated to make this a great game. I mean, for Todd Howard specifically, this is a game he has wanted to make for literal decades now. So it would make a lot of sense if their internal pressure is outweighing that community external pressure. In some ways, I think this passion for the project was really reflected through that direct. That passion was reflected from not only the project leads, but also a lot of other developers and producers on Starfield. I also found that comment about the first game in 8 years to be pretty interesting. Of course, that was a bit of a blow to Fallout 76. Fallout 76 was technically a AAA release, but obviously internally, Bethesda is not viewing Fallout 76 on quite the same level of Fallout 4 or Starfield. Which makes sense. Starfield seems like it's on a completely different level, but even Fallout 4 was quite a bit more substantial than Fallout 76. But Todd Howard has also asked how some of the extra time they've gotten as a result of the delays to Starfield has been spent on development.
And we've really spent it most of this year playing the game a ton, over and over, and making sure that it's balanced, it's as fun as possible, honing systems and interface, obviously bug fixing and all of those things, performance, and really getting it where we're really sure and solid on what we're putting out there for everybody.
I found this answer to be really encouraging, because notice he doesn't actually describe adding anything new. It's really an emphasis on refinement on that existing content and making sure things are bug-free and genuinely fun. That's another thing that I feel like was really well reflected in the Direct. Lots of the systems and gameplay elements in Starfield look surprisingly complex, but also shockingly polished, especially for a Bethesda game. And all of this is actually expanded upon even a bit further. Todd Howard is asked about how the vision with Starfield has changed over this super long development cycle. Starfield began development just after Fallout 4. Things definitely seem like they slowed down between for Fallout 76, but still, 8 years of dev time is pretty insane. But Todd Howard clarifies that their vision with Starfield, even during this extended period, has largely remained the same. Things have definitely taken longer than expected, and halfway through he realized this is why nobody tries to make a game like this. But it almost seems like some of those earlier rumors about a potential Starfield release date in 2020 or even 2021 could have some merit behind them. There's some other interviews with members of Xbox like Phil Spencer and Matt Booty, these being two of the highest members at Xbox, where they say,
the team has definitely matured, right? They've got, the Fallouts and Skyrims and Elder Scrolls under their belt. Truth be told, when the acquisition closed, this game had a significantly earlier ship date than where we're actually launching it, even significantly later than the date that we once had for the game, but it was earlier than that before. So sitting down with Todd and the team and explaining that we want to give this team the time. I think Matt says we have every QA person in our entire company,
the state of Washington,
like playing Starfield right now, looking at bug counts, looking at quality and where we are. The nice thing about what we showed today, from my perspective, is that was the game.
And as a nice follow-up, we hear the quote that if Starfield shipped today, it would have the fewest bugs of any Bethesda game that has ever shipped, which is incredibly encouraging. It really seems like these last couple of delays were to get Starfield perfect, not to just get it playable. But with that other quote of an earlier release date, I wouldn't be shocked if the Microsoft acquisition actually allowed Bethesda Game Studios to truly expand the scope of Starfield. We heard rumors of ZeniMax financial troubles, and perhaps they needed the money. An 8-year dev time may have not flown with their previous management. But now under Microsoft, Bethesda has the time and resources to really stretch their legs and get it perfect. And that's why we're seeing such an insane amount of content for Starfield, and with so much of it actually looking pretty polished, which is rare for a Bethesda game. But then we get into the question of the FPS, where Todd Howard reveals exactly how Starfield is going to perform on consoles.
I think it'll come as no surprise, given our previous games. What we go for are always these huge open worlds, fully dynamic, hyper detail where anything can happen. And we do want to do that. It's 4K on the X, it's 1440 on the S. We do lock it at 30 because we want that fidelity. We want all that stuff. We don't want to sacrifice any of it. Fortunately, in this one, we've got it running great. It's often running way above that. Sometimes it's 60. But on the consoles, we do lock it because we prefer the consistency.
So Starfield on consoles is going to be 30 FPS, the differentiator being that it'll be 4K 30 on the Series X and 1440p 30 on the Series S. So now for me personally, I get it, and I also hate it. I completely understand Todd Howard's message here of wanting to have that level of fidelity. Starfield looks beautiful, and making sure players are able to actually experience that totally makes sense to me. But why I hate this decision is the lack of choice. In my eyes, these things are completely subjective. While Todd Howard might prefer a better looking game running at a lower FPS, I typically prefer a worse looking game running at a higher FPS. Which is why the vast majority of time I will turn down certain options to make sure I can play at 60 FPS or even higher. And the aspect of this that really bugs me is the loss of player autonomy of how we want to play, or even how I want to play. It's pretty common nowadays for games to have this option, and a flagship title for Xbox not having a 30 and a 60 FPS option is a bit disappointing. There's been a ton of discussion online about this, and I'm sure many of you are already angrily commenting on my opinions, but honestly, I think a lot of this is missing the point. A rock solid 30 FPS may be perfect for you, but these things are subjective. And just because you are perfectly happy playing at 30 FPS doesn't mean I am. It's not like one of us is right or one of us is wrong here, it's just preference and differences of opinion. But at the same time, Starfield being locked to 30 FPS on consoles is definitely not going to ruin the game for me. There was a random 4chan rumor a couple of weeks ago that apparently id Software was brought in last summer to help redo or overhaul the combat in Starfield, and Todd was asked about that here.
We redid the combat ourselves, and it's really feeling great, but id has helped us really more on the graphic. They've helped us on the graphics side.
Oh, nice.
So we get into motion blur, that it's just how the game feels smooth. Some other things that they do in id Tech that we wanted to bring over into Creation Engine 2, and they helped us do that, and it's great.
So it seems like apparently all of that awesome looking combat was actually just Bethesda, but the equally as stunning visuals were worked on by id. So I do wonder, was that rumor just completely fake, or was there some truth behind it and they just got what exactly id worked on wrong? Because that was one of the things that struck me most about Starfield. Not only that the game looked great, but just how much of a visual upgrade there seemed to be from 2022 to 2023. The images of this character are the ones most commonly being used to showcase how much of a visual upgrade we got, and it really is remarkable. As well as Todd Howard describes getting an early look at what id is working on next, and he seemed quite happy with what he saw, but he doesn't actually share any details on that. But Todd Howard reiterates here that the goal with Starfield, and really their games in general, is to say yes to the player as much as possible. So when you're playing Starfield and you think, hey, can I do this? They want the answer to be yes. But space is really big, so tons of content was added over time as they chased down that yes answer. And I think you could start to see how chasing this yes answer really expanded into creating what we saw during the Starfield Direct with the sheer insane amount of content coming to Starfield. Todd Howard was asked about what other games inspired Starfield, or at least what he looked at during development. The interviewer mentions the games people are most often comparing, like Mass Effect or even No Man's Sky, but I think Todd Howard actually gives a far more exciting answer to this.
But believe it or not, it's the games that put you in a world, that transport you to a place. So I think it probably also as a flow probably has more of a feeling of like a Red Dead 2, right? Like I'm living the Western fantasy.
Yeah.
And so in this, you're living this science fiction explorer fantasy, and sometimes that's being on a barren planet and nothing is going on.
Or an Old West town, like we saw that in the Direct.
Right,
Old
or
West inspired.
and all of that. So for me, it's games that where I feel I am rooted in the reality of this universe of the game, and everything else kind of disappears.
Red Dead Redemption 2 is one of the most immersive games of all time, so Todd using that as a comparison rather than some of the other obvious space or sci-fi games, and really describing games where you truly feel transported to another world is incredibly exciting to me. In particular, when you consider the absolutely insane amount of dialogue for Starfield. This game's gonna have more talking than Fallout 4 and Skyrim combined. I imagine a ton of that is just in the depth and backstory to the various characters that you're going to find all over the galaxy. But if all of that side content is sounding like it might be a little bit too much, don't worry. Todd clarifies that even though there's a wealth of side content coming in Starfield, like a lot of what we saw in the Direct, there is still a core main quest and you can beat it and really feel like you won in the game. Bethesda recognizes that that aspect of games is very much so satisfying for players, and it's going to be here in addition to all of that side content. But they also recognize people play Bethesda Game Studios games for a really long time, so that wealth of side content will come in to make this game playable for years and years into the future. And they also talk a bit about extra content for Starfield.
We're going to be doing a lot of add-on content for Starfield. We love doing it. Our fans love it. We will have announced sort of the first one that's going to, we're going to do a story expansion pack that's going to be coming. Our plan is to do things of varying sizes, and we've done a lot of that in our previous games, so it's something that we really like doing, our fans like. So despite the size of the game, there's still things we want to add as far as features in the future and stories and things like that. So we think this is going to gain, hopefully, that's going to continue for a long time that way.
And what Todd Howard describes here really reminds me of some of the Fallout 4 DLC. We had the big expansion level stuff like Far Harbor and Nuka World, but also some more feature-focused content that is a bit smaller, like Automatron or even some of the workshop pack that came to Fallout 4. Some of the DLCs being feature-focused actually gets me pretty excited. It seems like there's so much going on with this game that I wouldn't be surprised if quite a few things ended up getting cut before release, so Starfield getting a healthy amount of DLC that explores some of that cut content or ideas they weren't able to fully implement just sounds really cool. I could definitely see Starfield getting a ton of DLC. You'll have to imagine people would be interested in all types of things, whether it be new ship parts or even mechanics for customization, to even just a new city on one of the various planets that is otherwise relatively barren. There's definitely quite a few ways you could see some of these DLCs being implemented, including the low-hanging fruit of skins. Starfield's already confirmed to have some skin packs coming with it. One of these is a pre-order bonus skin pack, but a more substantial premium edition for $30 more is also being offered. The premium edition will get you the first story expansion that Todd Howard was likely referencing in this interview, although notably there's no season pass available right now for Starfield, but also things like a laser rifle skin and more. Although I think the big thing that is going to get a lot of players to buy the premium edition is it'll give you early access to the game. You'll be able to play Starfield about 5 days earlier than anyone else if you buy this version, which is pretty massive. 72 or even 48-hour early access has been fairly common even with some Xbox games in the past. But a full 5 days, an entire work week, it will definitely get quite a few people buying this one. And if you're somebody who is planning on playing on Game Pass, don't worry, Microsoft definitely wants your money, so if you play on Game Pass, you can just buy this as a $30 add-on. We also know from the ESRB rating that Starfield will have in-game purchases, and that likely refers to things like this, that being the skins specifically. Although I still do wonder if we get a new paid mod system going forward, or even more skin packs. At one point, Todd Howard is asked one of his favorite moments recently he's had in Starfield, and what he describes is just layered and absolutely epic.
Let's see, just a few weeks ago, I had landed on one of the early planets, and this sandstorm blew through, and I went to run away from it, and this, ships can randomly, once in a while, they can randomly land, like enemy ships can land. So I'm going through the sandstorm, the ship landed, and I get in this firefight, and I got on the ship, and while I'm shooting the guys on the surface of the planet, the ship took off into space. So now I'm in outer space on the ship, and I was just like, can that happen? I guess that can happen.
There's so much to unpack just from this one sentence. First off, sandstorms confirmed for Starfield. We can see from the direct that armor is going to have your typical damage resistances from combat, so likely whatever weapon an enemy is using against you and your resistance to that, but also 4 specific environmental resistances, which will also be pretty interesting and a bit different. Perhaps with poor armor, things like a sandstorm can actually be crippling for your character, and you'll have to get off that planet as soon as possible. But also, not only can enemy spaceships randomly land near you, you can also get on board and go flying with them. How much of a sim is Starfield? Can we board other people's ships and just watch them go about their day? That seems like an epic feature conceptually, and even just the concept of you getting in a fight with a bunch of enemies, maybe at one of their outposts, and all of a sudden a spaceship full of reinforcements lands behind them and just helps them in the battle is absolutely insane. Definitely seems like Starfield is going to have some next level gameplay moments. Starfield's going to have a bunch of random rare discoverables in it, like finding a unicorn in Oblivion. Todd mentions there being some really special ones in this game, and he wonders how long after the game is out it'll take people to discover them. With 1,000 giant procedurally generated planets, you have to imagine there's going to be a lot of places to hide things in this galaxy. But during this, it's also confirmed that Skyrim has sold 60 million copies so far, which makes it one of the best-selling games of all time. And this is followed up by asking Todd, what does success look like for Starfield? It's a pretty weird situation right now now with Xbox games where copies sold is no longer the only value you have to look at. It seems very plausible that Starfield could end up selling less copies than Fallout 76, simply due to the fact that many people are going to be playing this through Game Pass. But Todd Howard has also mentioned here that Game Pass has allowed them to take some more risks with Starfield, because they know they'll still be able to get it into people's hands. A subscription service like this really lowers the barrier to entry. Starfield is going to be a $70 game, but I'm sure a lot of people are either already subscribed to Game Pass or will just subscribe for a much lower cost, but still gain full access to Starfield. And of course, due to consumer psychology, you'll probably end up spending more money just to play Starfield, because you'll probably stay subscribed to Game Pass for several months, so even if it is only $10 or $15 a month, very rapidly you'll have given them over $70. One of the big topics in the community before the recent direct was procedurally generated content versus handcrafted content in Starfield, and Todd Howard expands on that here once again.
Well, the planets themselves, the landscapes, pretty much all procedural. We kind of make these large, think kilometer-sized tiles we've generated, and those get kind of wrapped around the planet. As far as handcrafted content, more than any game we've done. I've stopped giving out numbers, but just in the dialogue, it's more than Skyrim and Fallout 4 combined, just in dialogue, right? So as we get into locations and art and everything, we've done more of it than we've ever done.
But one of the other really interesting quotes from this interview was about Fallout 5. Last year, in a pretty similar day after the showcase interview with Ryan McCaffrey, Todd Howard said Fallout 5 was coming next after The Elder Scrolls 6. But now we hear things aren't quite that locked in.
You said, yep, Fallout 5, I want to do that, that'll be next.
That was more of a general, it will clearly be after Elder Scrolls 6 at some point.
Okay,
let me clarify that one.
All right, go ahead.
At some point in the future.
This is really interesting to me because it would certainly make me think there is a much larger possibility of another studio working on Fallout. We have seen some rumors that an In-Exile Fallout game is in early production, and that would get me ridiculously hyped, and if Bethesda doesn't even have concrete plans to work on Fallout 5 next, and Fallout 76 is barely getting any content, I wonder if the ultimate explanation is somebody else internally at Microsoft is beginning to work on something. Although Todd Howard does comment on this a bit further later on in the interview as he is asked directly.
Grown a second team within the studio, unless you have, and that's...
Well, we have what I would call, a full-size group team on 76 still.
Right.
Updating that game, it's doing great, very fortunate. But you're right in that we have gotten bigger. We have 4 studios. We have the one in Rockville, we have Montreal, we have Austin, we have Dallas. So we have gotten bigger to handle all of this. We work with a lot of partners on stuff. But that doesn't speed things up. I want it to be faster, but that speed isn't the goal.
Right. Or should it
The
be?
goal is, hey, what's the product, what's the vision, how do we do this, and how do we continue to support the ones that we currently have?
Could any of the games that you and your team have created, any of these 3 franchises, would you would you want to work with any of them potentially on something in the future?
I mean, I can't say never to any of that. For us, it is what's going to get us the best product.
Yeah.
How do we stay focused? I think there's a lot of times where you can get unfocused and try to do too many things at once, and then they don't end up necessarily the way you want. And so if I look at other franchises or I look at entertainment in general, I haven't noticed the time gap between things being a negative.
Right.
Right? They can be a negative when you think about it and you make a calendar. Yeah. Hey, when Starfield 2...
look at Grand Theft Auto.
Exactly.
That hasn't suffered in the
slightest.
Or,
the gaps between... I think Half-Life 3 will do fine.
Unfortunately, of course, this answer suggested isn't happening, but still, I have some hope that somebody at Microsoft will hopefully work on Fallout, whether it be a remake, a new game, or just something. At this point, I'd even take more support for Fallout 76. And this continues on to discuss what about a potential Starfield 2?
If Starfield's awesome, and you want to do another one, and the team wants to do another one, and the company wants another one, it sounds like it's probably going to be a while.
I don't have a great answer for you there.
If Starfield really is a huge and massive success for Bethesda, they could not even start working on the next game for over a decade. Not releasing in a decade, but not even beginning development for a decade. And I feel like this is an interesting answer. I don't really like to bring it up in videos, but I have wondered for a while now how many games Todd Howard realistically has left. And here we see him say that The Elder Scrolls 6 could very well be his last Elder Scrolls game. To be clear, not his final game overall, just his final Elder Scrolls game. As mentioned, Todd Howard's not getting any younger, and you have to imagine with the Microsoft buyout of ZeniMax, Todd Howard probably got a decent payday. And this gets me back around to that Fallout answer. Is there a realistic scenario where, let's say Bethesda does The Elder Scrolls 6, Starfield 2, and then Fallout 5, but that project isn't actually led by Todd Howard? I mean, even with just that hypothetical timeline, you're talking about 15 years into the future. And I don't think anything is a given for what this company could look like around that time. Although, Todd Howard also mentions how Starfield is in some ways 5 or 6 games in one.
I mean, you could say in some respects, this is like 5 or 6 games in one, right? It's the spaceship game, it's a on-the-ground game, it's just a dialogue game, it's an outpost game, it's a crafted game. It does all of these things, and it always is tricky for us to get a good game flow where those things don't feel like they're separate games.
This is one of those things that I highlighted last year after we got the gameplay, how Starfield does really feel like multiple games fused together. And I think in many ways, people will be playing this game in wildly different ways depending on what interests you. I'm a huge fan of RTS games. I will probably dump hundreds of hours into outpost management and setting up space supply chains. While for you, maybe you're a bit more focused on dogfighting or even just beating every single side quest. And even later on in this interview, Todd Howard says that with Starfield, they want to give you lots of options and let you have the freedom to say no to some of those things if they don't interest you. But even with you saying no to certain features, there's still going to be enough other content to keep you compelled and playing. Overall, I thought this was a great interview, but make sure to get subscribed because just tomorrow we're getting the Xbox Showcase extended, and it seems like we could be hearing a bit more about some Bethesda games, at least according to a recent email. But if you're curious about my extended thoughts on the Starfield reveal, check out this video.